Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Doc Talk. So, tonight's topic is something that has been plaguing the South for about a month now, and that is allergies and sinus problems. So, also, this is something that is pertinent to our folks up north because, as you might have noticed, there is kind of a flu epidemic going across the country right now. And so, if you have not gotten your flu shot yet, I highly still recommend it because we've been having an unusually late season for the flu. And even if you end up getting a version of the flu that's not exactly 100% a match with this year's flu vaccination, then the likelihood is that if you do get the strain of flu that kind of did not get fully covered this year by it, that there may be enough similarity between the flu vaccination and the flu strain that's most commonly circulating, that instead of just getting a little bit sick, you're actually a little bit protected, and so you might not get as sick as you would otherwise. Please remember that the influenza does cause many people to have to be hospitalized every year, and in some cases, especially in children, like babies and so forth, occasionally it can also cause death. So, back onto the main topics. Allergies is something that's very, very common. And so tonight we're going to talk mostly about anything impacting on the sinuses here and here for the most part. So I find that a lot of people, when I look at them in clinic, they basically say, I've never had an allergy in my life, which is probably true. But the thing they don't realize is that sometimes when the pollen is flying thick and heavy, sometimes the sinus cavities and the eustachian tubes, the little drainage pipes that go from the ear down to the throat, sometimes those react to it even if you're not getting the classic itchy, watery eyes, sneezing nose, and sometimes people get itchy eyes or itchy ears from it as well. So sometimes if you look inside the nose, you'll see a little bit of swelling here or a little bit of fluid collection inside the ear that is related to the allergies, even though they have no history. So this is something that affects pretty much 60 million Americans per year, and of course more worldwide. So a few things that can be very helpful for allergy or sinus health is basically having a diet that's very rich in, you guessed it, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, rice, and the like. And it was shown that in terms of fighting off illnesses and boosting immune function, that the folks who had the highest percentages of fruits and vegetables tended to get sick less often. And there seems to be quite a few mechanisms for that. One of them is that when people are eating lots of fruits and vegetables and so forth, they actually have more responsive immune system, and so their immune system's a little bit better primed to fight off the bugs. The other thing is that when people are eating plenty of fruits and vegetables, it's very anti-inflammatory, and so the immune system's also a little bit less likely to react in a manner which it's fighting off the allergens like the pollen or the dust mites or things like that. So also, another thing that is a wonderful tool for allergy and sinus sufferers is a neti pot, sinus rinse kit. This is one of my favorite remedies for when people are having a lot of pressure in the sinuses, and sometimes they get pressure kind of behind the eyeballs and up in here, and soreness up in that area, and that's the neti pot. So it was a little bit too much to try to do a neti pot demonstration here in this studio space. We'll do a separate presentation on that another time. But suffice it to say, a neti pot or a sinus rinse kit is a very low-tech, very simple way of washing out the sinuses. Basically, the bottom line is that when the pollen or the virus lands in here and stimulates all of that mucus production, one way that we can take care of it is by taking medications such as Claritin, Allegra, Zyrtec, or other medications that suppress the immune system response to it. At the same time, if you actually use the neti pot and wash the sticky pollen and dust and all that other stuff out of the face and down the drain, then the body also reacts much less to it. I've had many occasions where people have essentially cured their own sinus infections through the use of the neti pot or sinus rinse kit. My general recommendations for the sinus rinse kits are: 1, especially if you're a new user, use distilled water. It will save you a lot. The water quality varies a lot across our country. Obviously, there's places like Flint, Michigan, and then there's places that have much better water quality, but universally, most of the water in the United States is treated with chlorine and other chemicals, which can be very irritating to the sinuses. Some parts of the country, people also would be better to boil their water first as well. Or if you get distilled water, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff because it comes without any chemicals whatsoever. If you're in a pinch, like if you're in a airport traveling and you can't get access to distilled water, then bottled water is a good alternative or safe bet. I do not ever recommend using shower water because God only knows what's growing in the sinks, especially in those nozzle heads where the shower water is coming out. There could be all sorts of like on board. And so generally speaking, the purer the water is, the more gentle it is on the system. Sometimes also people can use filtered water, but again, be very mindful that whatever the water source is that it's very clean. Those neti pots are designed for exactly the right amount of water and exactly the right amount of a salt bicarb solution. Sometimes people will use an actual pinch of salt, enough to make the taste like their own tears in saltiness. And sometimes people will actually get a pre-designed, pre-made salt and bicarb mixture that they can add to the sinus rinse kit, and then you basically put the nozzle here with the warm water in there. And the key point to this is make sure that you warm the kit to body temperature. It takes a few seconds to the microwave, or using warm water in the first place. Tilt it here, and the water will go up and down, and if you tilt forward, it'll go out the other nostril. Again, a little more than I could demonstrate here in this live presentation, so we'll give you guys a look at that later. If you're impatient and you want to see immediately how to rinse the sinuses, then you can also Google it, and there's plenty of people doing live, or maybe not live, but sinus and neti pot rinse demonstrations. But that, hands down, is one of my favorite recommendations for sinus and allergy sufferers, because there's just nothing like actually getting rid of the pollen or the dust or whatever it is that happens to be bothering you, just out the face and down the drain. Another tip for allergy sufferers is to keep the windows closed, especially at night. The trees are usually releasing their pollen at something like 3:30, 4:30 in the morning. So if you keep the windows closed overnight, it's a little bit less likely to drift all that into the bedroom. Also, speaking of keeping the air in the bedroom relatively clean, there's something called an air filter, which can be very helpful as well. Make sure if you get an air filter that you get it in a version called HEPA filter, HEPA, because that type of filter is tight enough on the mesh that it actually is able to filter out the offending pollens or dust or things like that. Occasionally there are some spoofs where they call it HEPA-like, where it's a filter, yes, but maybe the filter is too big, and then the pollen just goes zooming right through and doesn't actually get caught. So you want to get a HEPA style filter so it's tight enough in order to keep the room clean, and it's best done in the a few hours of very good clear air going into the body overnight. Alrighty, so we talked about how the neti pot is good for rinsing the early signs of infections. We talked about cleanliness of air, and of course, it would not be remiss if like tobacco. So people that use tobacco, another of the consequences is that the tobacco smoke is very irritating to these areas and up in here. And basically, it increases the rates for sinus infections. So occasionally with my tobacco users, especially those who are inhaling cigarettes and the like, I recommend a pneumonia vaccine because it protects against pneumonia a little bit, but also the pneumonia bacteria occasionally lands in the sinuses and is responsible for sinus infections. So by getting properly vaccinated, you may have a little less chance of getting infections here and here. But best of all, of course, is if you're using tobacco, please quit now. And if you have any questions, ask me about that later. Tons of 800 Quit Now numbers and internet things across the country that can be used for that as well. Alrighty, so things that you can do to help prevent a cold. So there are a few foods that have been specifically studied in their ability to help us to not get a cold in the first place. And one of them is here. I got some things. I don't have quite everything on the list, but I've got a few demonstrations here. So this is something called nutritional yeast. It is a wonderful food. It's got some B vitamins, and basically it's got a nice cheesy flavor. And so there was a study that showed that people that had a little bit of this most days actually had a chance of catching colds. Who knew? And it's very tasty. Also, probiotic types of things. So I've got a presentation where I talk about making homemade soy yogurt, so if you want to check out that presentation. And of course, there are various probiotics types of things. Generally speaking, if you do anything with good bacteria, you want to try to get a mixture of those in the capsules. So more on that another time. Something very low-tech as well, kind of like washing the sinuses with a neti pot, is gargling. So literally just gargling water for about 30 seconds a day. Plain old tap water, doesn't have to be anything fancy. Also lowers the risk of catching a cold by about 30%. So that's a really good low-tech and very cheap and safe investment as well. It's thought that when people are catching a cold, the virus actually has to stick to the mucous membrane, whether it's in the throat or the sinuses, for a while before it really kind of dives in there and affects the tissue. So it's perhaps possible that when you gargle, that basically you're kind of washing some of those virus particles out of the throat or out of the system, or doing something else that enhances the immune system in that way. Right, so next, getting plenty of sleep. So they say about 7 hours of sleep is also about right to prevent common colds as well. And antioxidants. So I got a few things here to demonstrate some antioxidants. And this, for example, is hibiscus tea. Some of the fruits and vegetables are especially high in antioxidants. If you look at Dr. Greger's presentation on barberries, for example, apparently that's the dried fruit with the most packed antioxidants available. A lot of the spices, so things like basil and oregano, cloves, are very, very rich in antioxidants. And when the body is filled with these antioxidants, it has a much better response in the immune system for things as well. And that reminds me of another aspect for sinus health as well. So when people come to me for tips on improving their sinuses and improving their symptoms, oftentimes they've gone and tried the over-the-counter remedies, such as that they're still having symptoms despite using these over-the-counter remedies. And also a lot of the over-the-counters or prescription cough and cold things, oftentimes they actually have a lot of side effects. Mostly you end up falling asleep with it. So I found this decongestant tea recipe actually on the Livestrong website originally, and have modified it a little bit. So one thing that I recommend is this humble little thing called ginger. Ginger is very anti-inflammatory and very good for helping with a lot of things. And if you take about an inch of the ginger and you Sometimes people like to peel it just because there might be some chemicals or something on the root of the ginger from processing and stuff. Anyway, if you take it, peel it, optional if you like, and you can boil it for about 15-20 minutes, and then take that water, cool it down, and add a little dash of cayenne pepper. The beauty of having a stuffy nose and sinuses is that a lot of our taste actually has to do with our sense of smell, believe it or not. And so even though the ginger is pretty spicy and the cayenne pepper is pretty spicy as well, chances are it will not bother you nearly as much as it might normally. The cayenne pepper actually has a molecule. When eating the cayenne pepper, within a few minutes of ingestion, the caspacin that's in there ends up causing a release of the mucus in these areas, and then it has a nice drying effect. As well, the ginger also tends to be very anti-inflammatory, and so full of antioxidants and quiets the inflammation, and so it's very nice for the sinuses as well. Another thing that can be done with this recipe that we're building for you here is a little squeeze of lemon juice and potentially, oops, where'd it go? Ah, there it is. Potentially also some honey. Honey is helpful for coughs and colds in part because it does suppress the cough reflex a little bit. So here's your ingredients for a nice cough and cold decongestant remedy. Just don't be too heavy on the honey. Basically, more details, I can put the recipe down below if you like. So, alrighty, what else? So, not only is cayenne pepper good for Roseanne, cayenne pepper is really good for the sinuses, but pretty much anything that's got some heat to it. For example, if you've got a cough, a cold, the flu, now is a really good time for your chilies and other hot peppers because it's the caspacin, it's the active ingredient that tends to open up the sinuses. Another thing that can be helpful for opening the sinuses is some sinus massage. I will not demonstrate this because I'm not the subject matter expert on that, but I did find a very nice presentation by a chiropractor who demonstrated some things where they're able to help with manually draining the sinuses, and by pressing on these bones, you can actually kind of loosen sinuses as well. Alrighty. Another random fact is kiwi fruit. So there's been a lot of studies on vitamin C and vitamin E. Some of the commercial supplements, for example, there's one called Airborne, and there's a few other emergency, vitamin supplements, have not actually proved to be very helpful during a cold, and some of them actually can be harmful. So I do not recommend zinc in the nose. There are some studies where people that put some, I think it's a gel of some sort, and it goes up in the nose, and unfortunately, for a few of those people, it resulted in a permanent loss of smell. So please, no zinc gels in your nose. However, if you want to eat plenty of foods that are rich in vitamin C, for example, your oranges or lemons, very rich in vitamin C as well, then those can be very helpful. There was a study where they were taking people who had some vitamin C supplements. And again, I usually do not recommend supplements in general. And basically, people often will take vitamin C supplements during a cold in the hopes that it will help improve the immune function and keep them healthier faster, which is not actually panned out. So taking a vitamin C supplement during cold did not help. But they did notice that if people were taking the supplements ahead of time, then they tended to get better a little bit faster, like 10% faster, and did not quite get as sick from it. But the risk from taking the vitamin C supplements includes a higher risk of developing kidney stones. So my suggestion is have a food such as a fruit, vegetable, peppers, for example, strawberries, any kind of fruit and vegetable that's naturally rich in vitamin C, and then you get all of the fiber, you get all those phytonutrients, you get all the benefits without the risks as well. All right. So moving on, there's a few other things that can be influential for the sinus health. For example, there was an old wives' tale about dairy and mucus production. So this was something that was hotly contested by the dairy industries and other folks. Is it true? Is it not true? And a couple of years ago, there was actually a study that showed, yes, actually, it is true for some people that when they drink dairy or milk, that they have the increased production of mucus. And so avoiding dairy, I generally recommend that now anyway because of all the other hormone side effects that go along with it. But basically, there's something to it that when you have that dairy product to go in the system, the morphine-like components in it, the caseomorphine, very rich in cheese, by the way, so avoid that too, especially during cough and cold season. Basically, the extra caseomorphine in the system binds to the receptors and stimulates production of more mucus. So, next, a few other things that may be helpful for improving your immune system and just enjoying life in general. So, when people were being studied for influence of things on allergy reactions, apparently listening to Mozart actually improved their immune system response. And so if you listen to Mozart, maybe you can enjoy the flowers and enjoy your music at the same time. Next, watching a comedian for an hour. And watching the comedian for an hour and actually laughing. The laughter was the key response in here. Boosted the natural killer cell activity, and so basically made the body a little bit more resistant to getting infections as well. But so you can't just watch any old terrible comedy, you have to actually laugh, and that was very helpful as well. Another one was kissing. So apparently smooching up with somebody for 30 minutes reduced the allergic response to both pollen and dust mites as well, so maybe a good chance to do that. And there was another follow-up study where they actually had a little bit more, let's say, direct expression of love, and that also was very helpful as well. I did not pull out the original study, so I don't know the details of how long and all that sort of thing, but you kind of get the drift. So basically, intimacy is very good for the immune system as well. And finally, another one that was a little bit surprising is that crying in response to a drama. So those folks that like to go to the dramatic movies and it's a tearjerker and they actually cry for it, there's something in that that actually helps boost the immune system and basically helps with the response to allergies. Who knows, maybe it's some sort of a release that that is helpful for it. But anyway, all sorts of other interesting, fun things are found at Dr. Greger's website, nutritionfacts.org, and Dr. Barnard's at nutritionmd.org. Oh, and there was a few other things with specific foods that helps to reduce the risk of allergies and eczema. And one of those was red rice. I don't have red rice with me. The closest I had in hand was actually black rice, but it's very, very similar in appearance. And so just imagine that being slightly redder than blacker, and you get the drift of that. Again, it's one of those things that when you're talking about fruits and vegetables and whole grains, generally speaking, the more color that something has, the richer it is in antioxidants and the better it is for fighting diseases in general. Green tea was also shown to help reduce allergy response as well. White button mushrooms, again, didn't happen to have any today. And last but not least, butterbur. It's a plant product that Dr. Barnard reviewed, and basically it helped to lessen that histamine response. So when we get allergies, our bodies are releasing histamine, and this plant product was able to reduce the histamine response while at the same time not making people quite so sleepy as they are with the medications. Alrighty, so I think I've covered everything on my points list here for sinus health tonight. So are there any questions from the crowd tonight? All right. I don't see anything popping up in my feed, so I'm going to call it a night. I hope you all feel better. Remember, wash your hands, and if you happen to be having the flu, stay home. Wear a mask if you have to be outside amongst other people so you don't contribute to spreading the flu. And if you're curious about other things you can do to help stay healthy, the CDC.gov has got a lot of great recommendations for how to stay healthy and not keep spreading the flu and catching colds and stuff. All right, so have a good evening. Good night. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.